My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 42 years old. I own a small bookstore in Woodvale, a quaint little town nestled deep in the heart of Vermont. In autumn, the town is cloaked in the brilliant gold of maple leaves, and in winter it's blanketed in white. Peaceful, like something out of a painting. I used to believe my life, though far from exciting, was one that many would envy, calm, steady, and full enough. My husband, Daniel, was a mechanical engineer at a plant near town. He was quiet, orderly, the kind of man who never forgot anniversaries or missed a single breakfast together. We didn't have children, not because we couldn't, but because we once thought we were already complete with just each other. Our little house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, where Saturday mornings smelled of cinnamon waffles, and late afternoons carried the soft strumming of a neighbour's guitar drifting in through the open window. Life was so peaceful, I nearly forgot it could change. Until one autumn morning. It was a Saturday. I remember waking up earlier than usual, brewing coffee, washing a few dishes left from the night before, and placing a sprig of dried lavender into a small glass jar on the dining table, a habit no one noticed, but one I always kept. Daniel wasn't in the kitchen, he wasn't in the living room, he wasn't anywhere in the house. There was only a folded piece of paper, sitting beside the still warm cup of coffee I had made for him. "Claire, I'm sorry. I need to leave for a while. Please don't look for me. Don't wait for me. Daniel." No goodbye, no warning signs. Not a single crack for me to notice that everything was beginning to fall apart. I sat frozen in the wooden kitchen chair for hours afterward. My hands trembled, as though the paper weighed 100 pounds. Everything inside me shut down. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. There was just a hollow emptiness, the kind that makes every sound around you feel too loud, too harsh, even if it's just the wind brushing through the maples outside. I had once believed I knew everything about Daniel, about marriage, about myself. I was wrong. The days following Daniel's departure blurred into a haze of routine and silence. I moved through my home like a ghost. Every morning, I still opened the bookstore on the corner of Main Street, greeted a few familiar customers, those who treated buying books like a daily ritual. I still smiled, nodded, and asked, "Would you like it gift-wrapped?" As if everything was perfectly fine. But each evening as I locked the shop door and walked back to my house, I returned to a cold, inescapable truth. I was living alone. There were no more familiar footsteps down the hallway. No more soft whistles from Daniel as he worked in the garden. No more 2 cups of coffee, just one, sitting cold and untouched. I had no family nearby. My parents had long retired to Florida. My younger brother was busy with his tech job out in San Francisco, over 2,000 miles away. I used to think I was independent, strong enough to be on my own. But the truth was, I had never prepared myself for this kind of loneliness. The only person I could truly talk to was Jenna, my neighbour 2 doors down. A single mother with an endless supply of optimism, Jenna often stopped by in the evenings with freshly baked muffins, and her 3-year-old son, Ollie, the only ray of sunshine in my otherwise grey days. One evening, after Jenna left, I found a small plastic dinosaur tucked beneath the sofa. I picked it up, and without warning, burst into tears. Not because the toy was special, but because it reminded me what it felt like to have someone around, someone who belonged. I started writing in a journal. Writing as if I was speaking to Daniel. Some days I was too angry to even write his name. Other days I laughed at the memory of how he used to forget to turn off the garage light. But most days I wrote to keep myself from falling apart. My sleep became restless. I'd often wake at 3 a.m., heart racing for no reason. I tried guided meditation, chamomile tea, even signed up for a yoga class, but nothing could fill the space Daniel had left behind. I didn't know if I was living or just surviving, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go on like this forever. Something had to change. I just didn't expect that something to arrive in the form of a 19-year-old boy, standing in the rain, knocking on my door with an old suitcase and eyes that were somehow both unfamiliar and achingly familiar. That afternoon, the rain was steady and soft, the kind of lingering autumn drizzle Vermont was known for, where fallen leaves blanketed the yard, and the wind howled under the eaves like memories trying to find their way back. I was curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, reading Little Women for what must have been the 100th time, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth, and a young man. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, a battered suitcase in the other hand. His dark brown hair was soaked, and his grey eyes shimmered under the rain like polished stone. For a moment, I thought I was seeing Daniel as a young man again, and my heart skipped a beat. "Miss Clare?" he asked, his voice soft, slightly unsure. "I'm Ethan James, Daniel's nephew." It took me a few seconds to make the connection. Ethan. I vaguely remembered a little boy grinning in a Christmas photo at Daniel's grandmother's house nearly a decade ago. "I just moved here for college," he continued. "University of Vermont. Uncle Daniel once said, if I ever needed help I could come to you. I just need a place to stay, for a few weeks, until I find something." He stood there, soaked and shivering slightly, trying to stay composed under the porch light. I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside, inviting him in out of instinct more than thought. Suddenly the house had new sounds. Soft footsteps, the gentle click of doors opening and closing, and the aroma of stronger coffee in the morning. Ethan didn't speak much, but he was polite, self-sufficient. He kept things tidy, cooked reasonably well, and had a deep love for photography. Soon, the living room began to display his printed photos. Snow blanketing a wooden fence, morning sunlight filtering through trees, an old yellow school bus parked along a quiet street. I still ate dinner alone most nights, but unlike before, the solitude no longer felt so hollow. Sometimes Ethan would join me, serving up whatever he had cooked, asking about my bookstore, the books I loved in my youth. He never asked about Daniel, but now and then I caught a quiet glance in his eyes that seemed to say, "I know what happened, but I respect your silence." One evening, as I was reading at the kitchen table, Ethan placed a steaming mug of tea in front of me. "You look cold. Peppermint helps with sleep." I looked up at him and nodded in thanks. When our hands brushed for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between us, a flicker, like the first chill of winter in an open field. I pulled my hand back immediately. He turned away, saying nothing more. I told myself it was just kindness, just a young man, sensitive, trying to be polite, but my heart, the one I thought had long gone quiet, began to beat differently. Softer, yes, but enough to know something was changing. Ethan's presence in the house began like background music, gentle, unobtrusive, but always there. Then gradually, without me realizing when, it became the main melody. I no longer startled at the sound of his footsteps on the stairs late at night. I no longer felt awkward when we crossed paths in the kitchen. On the contrary, I began to anticipate it. I waited to hear his door creak open in the early morning, waited to see which hoodie he'd choose that day, waited for the simple greeting, the warm glance. One evening, while I was baking in the kitchen, something I always did when my thoughts became too loud, Ethan walked in carrying a stack of old books. "I found these in a box behind the shelves at the bookstore," he said. "Did you know this is a 1963 edition of The Catcher in the Rye?" He held it out like a child showing off a hidden treasure. I smiled, feeling something inside me soften, a feeling caught somewhere between nostalgia and hope. We started having dinner together more often. Simple meals, but the conversations grew deeper. Ethan asked about my youth, About Daniel. Not with cheap curiosity, but with a quiet attentiveness that made me feel truly seen, truly heard. "I think Uncle Daniel left," he said one evening, eyes still fixed on his plate of spaghetti, "because you were stronger than he expected." I didn't know how to respond. I had never considered it from that angle before. One rainy night, the entire town lost power. We sat in the living room, flickering candlelight casting soft shadows across the room. Ethan poured me a glass of red wine and leaned back in the chair, his gaze lingering on me longer than usual. "Claire," he said, voice barely louder than the rain tapping the roof. "I know. What I'm feeling isn't supposed to happen, but I can't pretend I don't see you." My heart stopped for a beat. I looked at him. Yes, he was young, but that look in his eyes was not. It was the look of someone who had been hurt, who had lived, who had learned. "I just need you to know," he said. "I don't expect anything more." He stood up, walked toward the hallway, then paused. "If you want me to stop, I will." I sat there frozen, saying nothing, not daring to, because I knew that the moment I said a word, that fragile line between us would disappear. That night, I lay awake in bed, the ceiling above me like a mirror reflecting back every part of myself. Ethan had touched something inside me I thought had died along with my marriage, the part of me that needed to be heard, to be loved, not as a wife, but as a woman. I didn't respond, but my silence said more than any words ever could. That night in Vermont felt thick, like the air itself had stilled. The wind had died, the rain had stopped, but inside me a different storm still brewed. I stood in the kitchen, fingers tracing the rim of an empty mug. The soft golden light cast long shadows on the wooden floor, filling the room with a hush that felt almost sacred. A quiet footstep behind me made me start. "Ethan." He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. A long, steady gaze, one I had come to know so well. But this time there was something different in it, no longer just polite silence. This was an invitation, open, honest, brave, but never forceful. "I couldn't sleep," he said softly. "I didn't turn around. I was afraid, not of him, but of myself." "Me neither," I replied, my voice hoarse, like all the nights I had tried to hold back tears. He stepped closer. I could feel the warmth of him behind me. Then gently he placed a hand on my shoulder, and I didn't move away. We stood there, saying nothing, just the ticking clock and the quiet breaths of two people who were no longer quite separate. I turned, my eyes finding his. There was so much I wanted to say, but language had long since lost its usefulness. For the first time in a very long time, I let my heart speak instead of my mind. I rose onto my toes. He leaned in. The kiss wasn't fiery. It wasn't rushed. It was a brush, delicate as early spring wind grazing a white plum blossom. Tentative, reverent, and burning quietly from within. Ethan's arms wrapped gently around my waist, and every wall I had built, over months, over years, quietly crumbled. That night we were together, not wildly, not recklessly, but with a stillness and softness that spoke louder than any passion. It was understanding, healing, the meeting of two lost pieces, not trying to own, but simply to hold. The next morning I woke in his arms. Thin sunlight slipped through the curtains, reaching every corner of the bed. The scent of wood, of skin, of him, it was all so near, so familiar. Ethan was still asleep. I studied his face, the way his lashes trembled slightly. He was beautiful in a very human way, not perfect, but real. And then the old question returned, uninvited but unavoidable. What have I just done? The morning after was not harsh. It was quiet, gentle, a little too gentle. The sunlight came in thin and warm, casting soft gold across the sheets. I woke slowly, not startled, not ashamed, just aware. Ethan was lying beside me, still asleep, his breath slow, his face calm. I studied the curve of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows, the way his fingers curled slightly against the blanket. And then he stirred. His eyes blinked open, met mine. He didn't say a word, just reached for my hand. Our fingers intertwined under the covers, and in that stillness neither of us moved. No questions, no definitions, just the weight of two bodies sharing the same silence. That day we barely spoke. But it wasn't uncomfortable, it was delicate. Ethan made coffee. I made breakfast. He kissed my shoulder as he passed behind me in the kitchen. I leaned into it, not as a statement but as a reflex. We sat on the porch together, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the rain return to the maple trees. His hand rested on my thigh, mine in his. No words were needed. Something fragile had been formed, and neither of us wanted to move too quickly and break it. "This doesn't feel wrong," he said quietly later that evening. "Not when we're here, like this." I looked at him, heart caught in my throat. "But it's not simple either," he nodded. "I know." The days that followed were like that. Slow mornings, quiet laughter, shared books on the sofa, a kiss at the back of my neck while I shelved novels. Him making me tea without asking. Me folding his laundry alongside mine. Two people building something that didn't have a name, but had a rhythm. At night, we lay tangled in each other. Not always in passion, but in peace. He listened when I spoke of Daniel, of the silence that had lived in my bones long before he ever knocked on my door. "He didn't see you," Ethan said once, whispering into my collarbone. "But I do, and I believed him. Not because he said it, but because of the way he looked at me when I wasn't saying a word. I knew this couldn't last forever. The world outside would eventually come knocking, with its questions, its judgment, its logic. But for now, in that small house tucked beneath the red and golden trees of Vermont, I let myself have this, the warmth, the closeness, the impossible tenderness of something I never expected to feel again. And in Ethan's arms I was no longer mourning. I was living. Morning light cut through the window like a cold, merciless blade. No more candlelight, no more rain to drown out the questions. Just clarity and consequence. Only me and the truth. Ethan was still asleep. The blanket lay loosely across his back, his hair tousled, his breath slow and steady, peaceful, as if the night before had never happened. But I couldn't find peace. My chest felt heavy, weighed down by something I couldn't name. I slipped quietly out of bed, wrapped a thin robe around myself, and made my way downstairs. Each step on the hardwood floor echoed like a quiet accusation. I brewed 2 cups of coffee, out of habit, and stood by the window, whispering to myself, "What have you done, Claire? He's Daniel's nephew. He's too young. You were Daniel's wife. You are the adult. You should have known better." And yet, last night, for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as a forgotten widow, not as a woman going through the motions of surviving, but as me, whole, open, real. And that made it even more dangerous. Ethan appeared in the kitchen, his presence quiet, careful. His eyes met mine. No trace of awkwardness, no forced apology. Just the truth, sitting between us like something alive. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded, but I wasn't. "I don't regret it," he said. "But if you want to pretend nothing happened, I'll respect that." I looked at him for a long time. His eyes weren't boyish anymore. They belonged to a man, one who had loved and learned and understood when to let go. I reached for his hand. There was no trembling, no hesitation, but also no clinging. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan," I said softly. "But this can't go on." He looked down, silent. "If you stay, we'll keep crossing lines," I whispered, my voice breaking. Not because we don't care, but because we do. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes red but clear. Then I'll go. We didn't hug goodbye. No final kiss, no promises. Just two people standing in a quiet wooden kitchen, once filled with peppermint tea and candlelight, now holding only the scent of bitter coffee and the heavy silence of letting go. When the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't cry. I stood still, listening to the sound of his engine start and fade slowly into the golden blur of late autumn maples. And I knew I had lost something precious, but I had also reclaimed a part of myself I had nearly forgotten.